Hey everyone, today I'm going to talk about farm problems and then get into the Populist Party. So, just like the factories and the cities went through a huge period of change during the Industrial Revolution, the farms did too. They began to mechanize their farms, which means they began to use more machines, which helped them harvest crops so much faster. And they began to specialize in one specific cash crop instead of growing all their food, making their clothing, and bartering with their neighbors. Now they have one specific crop they grow and buy the rest of the things they need through mail order. The only problem with this method is that now their well being is connected to how high the prices are for their one specific crop that they're trying to sell. So they did end up having a lot of problems, maybe even more than the industrial workers in the cities. First, farming was expensive. The machines they bought, like the reapers and all the other fancy equipment that farmers began using were really expensive, and farmers often took out loans to pay for this stuff, which had super high interest rates. Plus, prices began to drop, so it became harder and harder to even pay back that loan that they got in the first place. And many farmers didn't even own the land that they were working on. For example, in the South, they used the crop lien system, or sometimes it's just called sharecropping, where a person works the land for someone else. So, in this situation, it is even harder to make a profit because some of the money you make goes to the landowner. Also, farmers are pretty individualistic people, meaning they like to be off doing their own thing, and they definitely weren't businessmen. But during the Gilded Age, they had to work with the banks and the railroads and manage their crops in the global marketplace. This is a lot for someone who just wanted to farm. And sometimes they weren't that great at navigating all this business stuff, especially when they came up against the big railroad trusts. The railroads often charged farmers high rates or more for a short haul versus a long haul on the same route. Or they would charge much higher rates in the West. Sometimes it would be cheaper for a farmer to burn their corn as fuel than to actually ship it and sell it somewhere else. Farmers tried to get the government to do something about it, but the government didn't do much at this time. Or if the government did try, it was super unhelpful. Like the Sherman Antitrust Act that they passed could have helped farmers, but it was too weak. And then the Wabash case said that the state governments couldn't regulate the railroads, so that ended up hurting farmers too. So the farmers decide to try and take matters into their own hands. They created something called the National Grange of the Patrons of Husbandry. Whew, that's a mouthful. Or maybe you should just refer to them as their shortened named the Grange, because you're not going to have a lot of time to write that full name out in your essay, and just saying it is a lot. At first, they started as a social group because many of the farmers were lonely out on their giant farms all by themselves, but then they realized that they could work together to bring some changes. So they were finally able to get state laws to pass in Illinois, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota. These laws, called the Granger Laws, named after the National Grange, helped to regulate the railroads. But with the Wabash case that we discussed earlier, the laws were declared unconstitutional, and the Grange lost a lot of influence. And in Texas in the late 1870s, they created farm alliances, which were similar to the Grange in that they wanted to create a place farmers could socialize, but they also wanted to focus on stopping the abuse of railroad companies and manufacturers. Out of the farmers' alliances, a new political party was formed. Their ideas were stated in the Omaha Platform, and they wanted free, unlimited coinage of silver, which would help lead to inflation, meaning prices would go up and they would be able to pay off their debts much faster. They also wanted no protective tariffs because those were only helping them factories and manufacturers, not the farmers. They wanted direct election of the US senators. And of course, they also wanted the government to regulate the railroads. So that they couldn't be charged higher prices in different parts of the country. This new party is called the Populist Party or the People's Party, and in the 1892 election, they became one of the few third parties to actually gain electoral votes. In the South, African American voters try to join the Populist Party, but are stopped by the voting restrictions there, which means that the Populists may have gained even more votes if things like the grandfather clause or the poll taxes didn't stop voters. And then in 1896, William Jennings Bryan runs as the Democratic candidate against William McKinley. Brian gives his cross of gold speech, saying that you shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold, meaning he wanted unlimited coinage of silver too. So the populists decide, instead of running their own candidate, to just support Bryan in this upcoming election. Well, McKinley, on the other hand, believes in the trickle down theory, the idea that if you support the big businesses, then this money will eventually work its way down to the working classes. And in this election, the big businesses win, which kind of hurts the populist movement. After this, Republicans and big business are in office for the next 16 years. Okay, your practice question today is evaluate the extent to which the populist movement marked a turning point in the United States economy or politics. So, when you're answering this question, you can choose to focus on the economy or on politics. And then you should be talking about the changes that exist. Like, is it a turning point or is it not a turning point? And then providing some evidence for that. So, take a minute to think through this question. How would you answer it? What would be your context? What would be your thesis? And what would be your evidence? Hope you guys have a great rest of the day.